Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you for joining us.
Just a few more days and then it will be May 29. May 29 will be upon us, and that would officially mark the one-year anniversary of President Bola Tinubu's administration. Well, this week on Insight, we will be reviewing just how much progress the administration has made in critical national sectors, and our guest analyst will gauge whether or not the administration is on course or may need to alter its plans in certain areas. Would also put in proper perspective the rationale for the World Day for Cultural Diversification for Dialogue and Development, essentially highlighting why cultural diversity matters. Elizabeth is billed to take up another key national issue. Elizabeth?
Of course, we will also be comparing Nigeria's inflation figures, and now we'll be taking cues from the recently released figures by the National Bureau of Statistics. And then we hear that Nigeria's inflation rate has hit 33.20%. We will analyze implications on businesses, Nigerians, and the economy in general.
Very well then, let's kickstart the program.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of aggrievance in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
Well, now we begin. From whichever angle you look at it, depending on who is looking and where you're looking at, I'm sure you'd agree with me that 1 year in the life of a government is definitely worth appraising. Maybe not necessarily enough to judge that government entirely, but significant enough to know what direction it is headed and whether or not it has shifted the needle, maybe ever so slightly in the right direction. Well, that is what we will be doing here today. We will be appraising the current administration of President Bola Tinubu as it prepares to hit the 1 year mark. My guest is Nia Kinsiju, development economist and public policy analyst. He joins us here to, x-ray and review, just how much has been achieved in the last 1 year. Welcome to Insight.
It's a privilege. Thanks for having me.
Of course, we know my guest is a bit under the weather, so if you see him a bit, laid back, that's because he's a bit under the weather. Otherwise, he's usually his vibrant, exciting self rather. But it's quite exciting to have you here, and thank you so much for coming on the set in spite of your health.
It's a privilege. Thanks so much.
I figure congratulations are in order. Most families are easily excited, when the 1 year birthday of their child or ward approaches. Do you sense that excitement here and now in Nigeria as we look forward to the president's 1 year in office? And if not, or why not, if not?
Well, practically speaking, in terms of reflections of either the level of economic index, social mystery index, and all that, when you look at those figures, they may seem depressing. But again, I think for any nuanced observer, you also realize that these are results of implementation of new policies and giving us new policies directions. For some of us who had also been an understudy of the administration, we feel excited because we know that the light is not just at the end of the tunnel. We can see the light, from the beginning of the tunnel, because we see a paradigm shift from what we have been doing. Perhaps for the first time over the last 60 years, we'll be breaking away from our dependency on the bust and boom in the character of our economy. We've always, since the 1970s, for instance, when we discovered oil, we've had this dependency kind of economy where we have prosperity within a short period of oil boom, and we go into a depressing session when there's a oil bust, you know. So, but now we are seeing an economy that is driven or will be driven by the market, which is the standard, the standard template for a developing economy, as it were. We have seen this in a number of countries. That we are doing it at this time, for us, it's exciting. Well, it's the initial impact may be depressing, but we believe that it's with the philosophy underlining most of the policies that the government had introduced into the space. We think that, I believe strongly, that things would, of course, change for the very, very better.
You know, honestly, even the president realizes, you know, that squeezing effect of some of the current reforms being put in place. He describes them as painful, yet necessary. I think I'd like to use some of his words here, and these are words that, you know, I recall the president saying during his inaugural speech on May 29 at the Eagle Square, where he said that we have arrived at this sublime moment, and that we need to march beyond the dimness of night into the open day of renewed national hope. I mean, would you say we're headed in that direction, considering that you've started already by, you know, identifying this shift, you know, the changes? Would you say we're headed in that direction that the president talked about in his inaugural speech, with some of what, also considering some of what has been playing out in, you know, in multiple fronts? What policies, perhaps, in some of these key sectors would you applaud and say, yes, these are beginning to bear short-term fruits, and, you know, Nigerians will perhaps begin to see the long-term gains soon enough? Yeah,
definitely. If you look at even the social aspect of redressing the economy, for instance, perhaps for the first time would have a trigger and a growth pattern in consumer credits, principally driven by the government. I think that is important because it's a culture. It's a culture that would provide well-being and comfort, or facilitate well-being and comfort for the average Nigerian when it becomes fully matured, starting from the civil service, as it were. Then we also have the student loan, which would come into effect, I think, in the next 1 or 2 weeks.
Yes, soon enough.
Appropriately, you know, framework in the context of law, you know, which means that it is institutionalized. So to that extent, that again is a new introduction into the space, into the Nigerian space. Then we are seeing some very ambitious construction, you know, that are now ongoing. We've heard about the Lagos Calabar coastal road. Yes. That is also inclusive of the Lagos Calabar rail line. You also have the very, very ambitious 1,000 kilometers Badagry Sokoto road, you know, and there are a number of interland roads to the east-west road and all that. The Boni Bodo, very, very strategic road too, you know, it's to be completed, you know. So I think we can see the direction, you know, and we can now also have we have milestones to determine how far the government is willing to go. And perhaps even more impressive is the fact that money may not be a problem any longer. Historically, and this is, anytime we had the boom, we feverishly go into building construction frenzy, as it were. And then while the boom was ongoing, the boss would caught up on us, and all of a sudden we will abandon those projects. It's a cyclical thing, so much that we have more than 5,000 federal government-owned projects that have been abandoned. But now, I think there's also a paradigm shift in that, because now there's a guarantee of revenue earnings. We have seen the returns that are being shared by FAC, every month, the Federal Accounts Allocation Committee, what they are sharing between, amongst the three tiers of government, the federal, state, and local government. Now, that tells us that whatever the federal government, even the state government and the local government wants to do in terms of moderate infrastructural facilities that they want to deliver, there will always be that fund, to drive it, as long as they are doing that within expectations, So we are not likely to start experiencing issues around abandoned projects. We are likely to also experience more completion of older abandoned projects, and to a large extent, our capital harm, the capital harm of our budget will perform properly, will perform impressively. Perhaps for the first time again in over 20 years, the administration had given us a return on the capital side of our national budget. For the first time, it is higher than the recurrent harm. So which means that more Nigerians have access per capita, to government facilities and perhaps government earnings, because when you have where you have higher recurrent expenditure, it is only targeted or given out to a small number of people, percentage of the population in civil service or public service, as it were. But it is from the capital budget that most of us Nigerians that are common, average Nigerians, that have access to what government is doing. And those are the things, it's the infrastructural facilities that actually enable businesses, that actually enables conveniences, that enables well-being and all that. So those are the philosophy that underpins what the government is doing. True. And I think going forward, we would be able to return a positive impression on what the government is doing.
Okay, so now we've talked about, or rather you've talked about the underlying philosophy and then what's been achieved. So I'd like for you to just break this down a bit further and, you double down on the economy, but maybe down to the bottom, and appraise how some of these economic policies or interventions that you've outlined by the federal government have impacted the informal economy, which, of course, forms the bedrock of sustenance of many Nigerians. And that sector, that strata, is struggling to, to stay resilient. We have heard and seen some of these, the remedial economic plans of government to cushion the pains being felt by Nigerians, arising from some of these, these measures being put in place. But I guess my question to you is, are things really getting better for, say, the organizer along that expressway? The one you pass sometimes and you see him park a small machine by the road to, increase the air or in your tire. That's middle-aged lady who grants tomatoes and pepper at the market. That boy, that young unemployed graduate, whose also is selling bread along that Maraba traffic every time. I'm trying to just reference, that unregistered informal economy, which often stands as a beacon of hope for many Nigerians. Are they feeling, at what point will they begin to feel some of these, the impact of some of these reforms being put in place?
I think we can actually restructure that question.
Okay.
Because we have more Nigerians counted in the informal structure, informal economy, because we have challenges of unemployment. Most people are engaged in informal activities because of the fact that they don't have formal economic engagements. So I think the focus should actually start from that. Even the Yalakara on the side, the Mama Kose on the side, if she's gainfully employed, may not likely be on the roadside. So perhaps that is where we should look at. And I have also reviewed a number of projects being implemented by the government, one of which is the Renew Hope Cities. what impresses me is the fact that in the renewed Hope cities, there is a tie-in of what percentage or number of possible employments that will be generated. So, for instance, across 13 states that are being implemented now, you have about 3,500 units, of
True.
different housing character, that would be delivered. And for each of those estates in the states that will be they will be built, there are targets at least for each of those estates to have a creation of direct and indirect jobs.
True.
So it's important for all these projects. The more the projects we have,
yes,
the better for the economy.
And I agree.
Mm-hmm.
And
you
I
have
see
more employment being generated. That's one leg of it.
Okay.
The other leg is to also say that there are some people that are not even employable. There are some people, even by age, are outside the effective employment age. A 60, 65-year-old woman selling kose or granite on the side and all that. Now, there's also that recognition.
Who depends on that business for sustenance.
There's a recognition.
For the sustenance of a family as well.
Exactly. There's a recognition of that by the government to say, okay, can we do a grant, of a collective 50 billion naira and just share amongst these people? One, to create, because for them it's value creation. No matter the sum of money given out to this set of people, it has been established that they are very, very serious-minded. And they can be very, very transparent with the way they manage their resources, no matter how small. So I think over the last 3-4 weeks thereabouts, there have been a lot of activities around this 50 billion naira being shared amongst this set of people. And to a large extent, the theoretical the underpinning of this elevating those in the informal sector, it is also to enable or to facilitate a prosperous economy. Once you facilitate a prosperous economy, and that's some of the things we are talking about, the credit system, construction and all that, when more people have money in their pockets, they are also ready to buy, from the roadsides and from the informal sector. And that enhances the productive capacity of those in the informal sector.
We may not have enough time to, expansively dwell on some of the interventions carried out by this administration in the amount of time we have here on the program. But like I somewhat inferred or insinuated at the commencement of our discourse, that we would do a cursory review of some of these, critical sectors. One area I would like for you to just touch on is the issue of government tax reforms and just how impactful it has been so far. I get that Nigeria undoubtedly faces significant revenue challenges, which of course continues to constrain the country's capacity for achieving sustainable growth. But of course, I reckon that that reinforces the rationale for government tax reforms, basically as mobilization for revenue. However, I need your insights into some concerns raised by some analysts over what they termed the unintended consequences of government tax reform policy. They argue that a country cannot tax itself to prosperity and that higher taxes do not lead to sustainable growth. Put that against the prevailing economic situation in the country, and now the average Nigerian, is perhaps struggling to keep his or her head above water, and rationalize the argument for appropriate taxing, multiple taxes, and tax evasion, and the need, of course, for sensitivity on the part of government on this whole issue. Recently, we saw the president demonstrate that on the cyber security levy. What are your thoughts on just how all of these can be fused and made to work?
Well, thank you. Well, I think there is also a need to understand the context of tax administration in Nigeria. To who are we talking to? That's the first thing. We've identified the informal sector, for instance. To a large extent, at least at the level of the federal government has no business relationship with the informal sector, because the it is even not proposition. I think the Finance Act 2019, thereabouts, clearly states that any business, any business that with a turnover of less than 25 million is exempted from company income tax or value-added tax. So, to a large extent, I know that no informal sector participants, or business entrepreneurs, as it were, will qualify for that. So, there cannot be any border. Now, there's also a serious effort by the federal government to engage with the subnational, so that subnationals, so that this idea of levies in the markets and all that would also be controlled, will be managed, and that there will only be one channel of taxation, and that out of the more than 100 and something taxes that had been profiled across the country, that the taxes that will be paid by any Nigerian should not be more than 3 different taxes. So I think there's a lot of effort being made along that line, and the important thing for us is to say that all low and middle income earners, except for those who are working, who would have to pay, their pay as you earn, most people are not even qualified for business class taxation.
We seem to have run up our time for this episode. This segment of the program. I'd wanted us to, talk about the target sets for MDAs by the administration, and just how, how of course, the tracking mechanism in place to monitor some of these deliverables, as a tool for transparency in corporate governance. And unfortunately, I can't get your thoughts on that. And of course, there are other issues I would like for us to talk about. We will be doing that in the course of our countdown to May 29, which officially marks the 1-year anniversary of the current administration. We would be bringing you back. Hopefully, by then you will be a lot stronger and feeling up to it, and then we can take on some of this discourse. And some would say that the president is also fast, and some have argued, especially from the opposition camp, that the president is fast losing his title of crusader for social change in Nigeria. That's another issue I'd like your thoughts on. Like I said, this is an ongoing conversation that will build up to May 29, and we will be bringing you into the studio from time to time to take on these issues.
It's a pleasure.
Akin Siju, development economist and public policy analyst, I would like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
It's a privilege. Thanks for having me.
Now let's turn our attention to the issue of culture as a global public good, and why the world celebrates cultural diversity for dialogue and development. You may wish to ask, why does cultural diversity matter? Well, now let's get some perspectives on this from the Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Cultural Orientation, Otumba Biodun Ajiboye. Yes, thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I would like for us to begin this conversation on cultural diplomacy, especially as a tool for global public good. You would agree, I would, and most people would readily agree that globalization has largely impacted positively in breaking barriers and building bridges amongst nations of the world. But I am not naive enough to proclaim that it has completely wiped the slates clean, and there are no more prejudices and biases and misunderstanding amongst people of the world. But I want to believe and think that in celebrating the cultural diversity for dialogue and development, that the message, lies between a greater appreciation of people's backgrounds, and for people to no longer see each other as strange bedfellows, but as individuals with common feelings, common understanding, and common worldview. Is that right?
Considerably, you are very correct. And I'll tell you something. Culture is one of those very strong things, fundamental things that melt people's hearts, whether you are in government, whether you are in business, whether you are whatever, because everybody's culture comes highly respected by everybody. Hardly would you see any environment filled with sanity that would disrespect its own culture or other people's culture, except there's a reason. I will not stand here and say cultures are not disrespected. If cultures are not disrespected, there will not be wars around the world. But the truth of the matter is that the theory of cultural diplomacy basically is, let us use culture to deepen intergovernmental or international relationship or good diplomatic relationship among nations. And culture has been one tool that has been used considerably to achieve global peace. As a matter of fact, between you and I, when the concept of Millennium Development Goals was conceived in the year 2000, erroneously or otherwise, culture was significantly omitted. And by 2001, UNESCO, and now an organ of United Nations, recognized the absence of culture as a grave danger to global peace and global development. So they came up with a declaration on cultural diversity. And of course, that was 2001. By 2002, they already appreciated the fact that 21st of May should be declared as World Culture Day. You see, so it's an attempt to rectify an initial error, because culture is one of the tools that everybody wants to use around the world to bring global peace. This is why any serious government anywhere in the world which had not taken culture into consideration in their global and policy formulation processes, they go back to the drawing board to recognize culture. Because the Chinese appreciated that culture is a fundamental part of life, and they embedded, inculcated, and imbued culture into their diplomatic
and that has been a
plans.
catalyst for their development, I should say.
Basically. So we are here today at this juncture to tell the Nigerian people that we cannot afford to ignore our culture if we really want peace and development. So the gospel according to cultural diplomacy.
I thought you were going to say the gospel according to Otumba.
No, not at all, not at all. I am an officer, I'm a servant of the government. So therefore, anything I say is to put government in good light. This is just the way it is. So we are preaching everywhere to say, look, we cannot afford to ignore our culture. Unfortunately, the Nigerian space, government and others, have seen culture as mere entertainment. When you have August visitors, line them up in costumes and let them dance. The second part and most disturbing part is the fact that the Nigerians see culture as voodoo. And it is not just that. Culture is a way of life. Nothing can be achieved without culture.
Let's double down on this. I mean, when you raise the issue of culture, there's a mix between culture and traditions there. And you said some people see culture as voodoo. As far as we know, as far as I know, culture, or as far as culture is concerned, and since I became even more aware, maybe I should say, having had the opportunity to travel more than my immediate environment now and having experienced other cultures, I became, more intrigued by this debate over culture and the crisis of identity. Culture, of course, like you've said, is an amalgam of all that constitutes us as a people. Besides even these traditions and, even including our ancestries and, maybe, our past, and it even tells us where we're headed to. But I would like to ask you, and this is where the issue of labeling comes into play now, as far as culture is concerned, and it's also a debate, and I wonder what your view will be or is on this subject matter. The debate essentially is on the issue of, on the issue of culture and labeling. And I'll give you an example. Who, for instance, determines or labels me to be who I am? Who says, for instance, that, is my, who defines who I am as culturally? Does the word are we what the world sees us as? Do I simply, for instance, accept it who the world says I am because they see me in a certain light, and so that makes that perspective becomes my identity? Or do I or we say or determine who we are with our culture and culturally?
Whoever you are, whoever the world perceives you to be, whoever you perceive yourself to be, whoever your environment perceives you to be, is a function of cultural appreciation and understanding of who you are. Your culture defines you. It doesn't matter who you are. Unfortunately, the African culture had been subject to a lot of global conspiracy. The world, for some reason, tries to put Africa down in the area of our cultural renaissance and understanding and appreciation. But Africa has got a right to put itself up, you know, and begin to say, you are misunderstanding my culture considerably. My culture is the best. My culture does not preach war. My culture does not preach cannibalism. My culture does not. My culture is not as primitive as you claim, as you want to believe. My culture is a culture of respect. Is a culture of honesty. Is a culture of. Is a forward-looking culture to development. And if you look at it, let's take Nigerian for instance. Let me give you a proverb in my native dialect. They said, "Ẹni tó gbàgbé ilé ó so àpò ìyàkọ́. Whomsoever forgets his roots has only succeeded in hanging the pouch of his suffering, and someday you talk it off the wall." That means that if you neglect your culture, you're only postponing the evil day about yourself. So, culture is one thing we need to take along ourselves with development.
So the assertion now is that culture as an identity is typically defined by us and not the way the world sees us.
Not at all. So, but we need to propagate. The world is a global village. Everybody must propagate his own belief system, his own identity, his own culture. I mean, for instance, as young people, we never danced Nigerian, we never listened to Nigerian music. If, as a matter of fact, as a secondary school boy, Nigerian music is for the lower people that are lower in intelligence. But within 25, 30 years, Nigerian music became culturally rooted, particularly in Yoruba language, and it has crossed every part of the world. You tune to an American radio, you listen to, you know, our boys, the Davidos, the Wizkid, and all of that. The fundamentals of their song is in Yoruba language.
True, again.
And that is propagation of culture. So what I'm saying to you is that you need to propagate your culture. If you don't propagate your culture, it's static. And when it's static for too long, it becomes forgotten or abused.
Because essentially you define who you are. Your culture defines you as an identity.
Definitely, yes. Your culture defines you. When you grew up as a man, nobody teaches you your culture. You grew up to understand who you are by your language, by your relationship with your parents. As a young boy, I greeted my father with my chest on the floor. And that is a mark of respect that we have in my culture. And the Nigerian culture encapsulates that. In generality, the Igbo man will greet his parents with a lot of respect. The Hausa man will greet his parents with a lot of respect. So that respect part of our culture is generic. It goes across all the cultures of Nigeria. Whether you are Nupe, whether you are Tiv, whether you are Urobo, whether you are Shekiri, whether you are Kanuri, whether you are what do they call the Jos Plateau people. All of these people, we have a common culture in honesty and respect. The Nigerian culture is a culture of honesty. All we needed to do was to carry this cultural element into our policy-making process. But we missed the opportunity because we were colonized, and the British way of life was fostered on us. So we didn't have a choice. For instance, I understand that about a considerable part of our law is rooted in English tradition and culture. Yes. As a student of law, the fundamentals we are told is that custom and tradition are the basis of law. Correct?
Correct.
Now, if that is correct, it goes further to understand that, okay, law is a major pillar upon which governance, politics, and government is resting. Therefore, culture and tradition is a an important part of governance, of government, of politics, and of lawmaking. And that is why we are proposing to our lawmakers that we need to give orientational retreat, cultural orientational retreat to our lawmakers, our diplomats, our policymakers, in line with the act that established us actually, says that all lawmakers, policymakers, diplomats must come for cultural orientational training. If you don't understand the culture of a people, you can't make laws for them. You cannot even go among them to say, that's why we have cultural exchanges among nations. Culture is key. Nigeria must begin to recognize culture as an integral part of development. If not, another 20 years, we have a very serious problem if we don't address it now. And the president is interested. He's given us that brief to say, culture defines everything. The path you take as a nation is as a result of how much of your culture you have been able to define. The progress you profess as a nation is as a result of how much of your culture you are able to propagate. The future you want to bequeath your children as a country is dependent on how much culture you are able to bequeath to them.
Yes. Let me just say it clearly here, that if there's anything I doubt, it's not your passion for what you do. It's almost palpable. I mean, it's there for us all to see. And I like the rather unique perspective that you're bringing into all of this. And it's something I've had time to think about over time. I like that you've talked about the imperatives for culture in governance. I particularly like that part in the early, minutes of our conversation where you said culture is not voodoo. And, and when you talked about the need for our lawmakers to embrace cultural reorientation and all of that, I was tempted to ask and this is a question I've asked the lawmaker, if that lawmaker, the government official, will be willing to take the oath of office by perhaps taking one stick somewhere and swearing to Ogun or Shango or Ayelala and promising not to steal from government or public coffer. How radical do you think we can go with all of this cultural reorientation? If we have to infuse culture and tradition into corporate governance, for instance, how far and expansive do you think some of these cultural reforms can be embraced or, infused into governance, for instance?
It depends on leadership. We thank God we have a leader today who sees culture as an instrument.
Or do you consider that backward?
No, it's not backward. President Obasanjo had an essay on culture, Professor Abimbola, Wande Abimbola, who got sworn in by a sword. Mudashiru was governor of Lagos in 1984. He got sworn in by sword. You cannot. You see, let me tell you the genesis.
So it's possible?
Of this. It's possible.
It's possible.
I've cited it.
Sorry, yes, my director is telling me to push you quickly along because we're fast running out of time. So, all of these things we've said brings me to this Nigerian new global cultural digital platform that we're all talking about now, the Dudu Plugs. Yeah. But I wonder how that would engender our cultural identity and, clear perhaps pre-existing doubts, seeing how it is, again, that we're collaborating with the Americans on this project. And I wonder what structure this collaboration would take or is going to take so that we don't have some political, crisis evolving over time.
No culture exists in vacuum and in isolation. If I cite the example of the Chinese or the Japanese have pushed their culture to us. They sold their cars to us. We buy Toyota, we buy. So no culture, no culture exists in isolation.
True.
Now, we want to put our culture to global reckoning. We can't be doing everything here and expect them to see us properly.
True.
Let's take it to the center of the world.
I am eagerly looking forward to the nature and style of your agency's campaign on fostering a truly integrated nation. Perhaps by building on the collective strength of our diverse and disparate ethnic nationalities. How do you intend to structure your messaging to downplay, on what we see these days, this projection of ethnicity in almost all of our national life, which of course is a subsisting challenge. I wonder how your campaign now intends to rather deploy ethnicity in a fusion to build nationalism. you know, and engender that togetherness, you know, that speaks to the core of the Nigerian spirit. That spirit of, yes.
Ethnicity is a political tool used by enemies to divide us. We are not a people who so much cared about ethnicity. It is a recent political tool for people who really want to divide us. Our culture is a unifying factor. If today, if they say they are doing New Yam Festival in Ofala or Onitsha,
yes,
you leave Lagos and you go there to see it because it's cultural tourism. You don't care about whether it is your ethnic development or ethnic interest or not. If they are doing your festival in Lagos, people come from everywhere to see your festival. Don't you know people travel to Rio de Janeiro to witness that that samba
yes.
dance? So culture is a unifying factor. We just need to propagate it properly. I can assure you the kind of thing that culture can bring to the table is more than whatever you think you had gained from oil in the years. We just need to focus and propagate properly. And we are here to speak for government, to spearhead a lot of this, you know, campaign. We are coming up again with a return of our cultural value. If our cultural value was properly packaged and sold through schools, curriculum of schools, which we are trying to do now, you will see that all the decadence that erupted in our society would have been better managed. Boko Haram is the latest development. Banditry was not part of us. Kidnapping was not part of us. It is as a result of the breakdown of our cultural, you know, values as a people. We need to begin to re-preach that through our children, so that the future of Nigeria can be better. We can't. The barrels of gun cannot cope. Why they cannot cope most of these problems? There are secondary, you know, solutions. There is what we call social solutions to a problem, and this is what culture is supposed to solve. By the time we bring back our cultural value, and our children and young people appreciate cultural value through their schools, through their school curriculum, you see a change in society and societal behavior towards even citizenry, nationality, patriotism, and all of the rest of it. It is culture that defines a nation. Nation does not define culture. Therefore, without a cultural identity, no country can have a national identity. True. Without a national identity, you can't have a national character. Without a national character, you can't have citizenship, patriotism, and nationalism.
This is clearly, this passion that we see is clearly is something we clearly need to replicate in other sectors. Executive Secretary and Chief Executive Officer of the National Institute for Cultural Orientation, Otumba Biodun Ajiboye, I'd like to thank you so much for coming on Insight.
Thank you.
It's been a delight, a pleasure listening to you passionately talk about this issue. There's absolutely no doubt that this is something you're passionate about. We'd like to thank you so much for the work you're doing, and we look forward to seeing you here on Insight another time to perhaps continue this conversation. Thank you so much indeed for coming on the program.
Thank you. Pleasure.
Elizabeth Omori is up next.
Nigeria's headline inflation rate has increased to 33.69% relative to the March 2024 headline inflation rate, which was 33.20%, indicating a further increase of 0.49 percentage points. Data from the National Bureau of Statistics show that the headline inflation rate was 11.47%, higher compared to the rate recorded in April 2023, which was 22.22%. The food inflation rate in April 2024 was 40.53% on a year-on-year basis, which was 15.92% higher compared to the rate recorded in April 2023. How do we maintain a balance and reduce inflation? My guest, Dr. Tochukwu Okafor, who joins us via Zoom, will speak to us. Dr. Tochukwu, thank you so much for joining us on Insight.
Oh, thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's start talking. What would be your assessment of these figures by NBS?
First off, it's no surprise. I mean, it's no surprise to anybody at this point. But for purpose of clarity and simplification, I'm going to do what I don't like doing. I don't like doing partial equilibrium analysis during when I'm discussing these matters. But at this point, I think we just have to do it briefly. So going back to February, we know that in February, inflation was, I think it came in at 31.7, right? And when we saw the differential between February and March, from 31.7, it jumped to 33.2, I think. And we know that one of the major causes of that was the exchange rate crisis during the period. I mean, everybody was putting or pivoting all the expenses on exchange rate. And then we saw that the gap between the differential between February figures and March figure was very high, 31 to 33. However, for these April figures, if you look closely, you see that there was an increase, but it was tepid. I mean, the inflation figures jumped from 33.2 to 33.69, right? And food inflation jumped from 40.01 to 40.53. Now, the reason why these figures were tepid was, if you noticed in the last month, exchange rate has been stable. I mean, relatively stable. I mean, we witnessed a certain level of appreciation when it, I think, climbed to, I think, around 1,100. But navigating away from that, the real problem here isn't the temporary measures that the CBN is employing. And I think at this point, it's clear that we have to accept that this is not a job for just the CBN. We've been saying it, but at this point, I think it's becoming more obvious that the CBN is not able or will not be able to single-handedly handle this. Both the fiscal authorities and the monetary have to come in play at this point. And why do I say this? I say this because I think the next MPC meeting is holding, I think, next week, right, or this week. And there is most likely going to be a rate hike because the governor has unequivocally stated that with the current or continuing inflation increase, there will be a rise in MPR rate. So we are most likely going to see MPR increase by 100 basic points from the 24% we are seeing, or maybe 100 or 150 basic points. But,
all right, let's keep our fingers closed. Let me quickly come in there. The rise in food inflation on a year-on-year basis was caused by increase in prices of virtually all the classes of food. This has encouraged food inflation, and this is actually affecting other aspects. So what are the implications? Could you break it down for us?
Okay, so like I said, this thing is not a one-way traffic. So first off, in the markets, what you're seeing is more of speculation, right? Some people that are not even using foreign products or maybe fertilizers imported to grow their crops are actually including the dollar equivalent to their prices because everybody is just maximizing or cashing out on this current crisis. But the truth about it is there are some organizations that are actually suffering the whole exchange rate crisis. So first off, we know that people have to import fertilizers, we import the machinery we use, we import even the seeds, even the feeds for the poultry. But aside that, if I'm going to deviate a little bit, most of the corporates with this MPC meeting that is coming up, this MPR, if it's increased, right, and then increase the MPR rate, what you're going to be seeing is the balance sheet of most of these corporates are going to explode. And you're going to be seeing non-performing loans from the banks going to increase. I mean, the CBN has said that the benchmark should be between 7 and 8%. We might see this increase because well, some of the companies, for instance, Dangote, for example, has, I think, 700 billion in commercial papers. And right now, with this revaluation for the banks, we are going to see, and then this increase in MPR rate, we are going to see that the debt profile of some of these companies are going to skyrocket, and you're going to see decline in production. So once that increases, especially with regards to their debt profile, you're going to be seeing an increase in their payment patterns. And once there's an increase in their payment patterns, there's going to be reduction in production. And when there is a reduction in production, by extension, you're going to be seeing an increase in the prices of goods. So the same applies to some of the food production companies and also the farms. We also have the issue of insecurity. We also have the issue of lack of palatable or adequate roads networks. But those are not really the problem. The real problem here is the inflationary crisis is stemming from the banking industry. With the recapitalization in place that is already ongoing, coupled with the crisis of the CBN trying to increase MPR most likely by 150 basic points tomorrow, we are going to be seeing most companies transferring that whole package, if I can use that word, to the consumers. So you're going to be seeing consumers paying a lot for food. So the problem now is this thing is going to continue lingering on and on. Now, fighting the dollar is a temporary feat for me, because if you look closely now, the dollar is currently at 1,400 again, even though it appreciated. So this continuous fluctuation is going to continue milking the whole inflationary crisis. Now you need to understand that inflation is different from the inflation rate. What we are looking at here is just the rate. The prices are sticky. If it has increased, it has increased. If you increase the prices of pepper, it stays there. So the next rate that you're going to see is going to be increasing. So the problem now is they are not looking at the inflation itself and the impact on the citizens. They are looking at the rate. The real thing we are supposed to be looking at is the prices and know how to peg some of these prices.
But really, what is the way out of this?
You know, I've been saying this and I'll keep saying it, and I'll say it till someone hears it. The truth is, it might sound harsh to say it out loud, but the only way forward now is to demonetize. I'm sorry, I'm going to say this. The truth is, a lot of people say it's the harshest policy, it's inhumane. But the truth is, the suffering they are going through now is as inhumane or even more inhumane than that policy, because if it had started being implemented, by now we would have started seeing the result, because the truth is the amount of money supply and cash flow in circulation in the economy is part of the reason why we are seeing this inflationary crisis. People know that there is money in circulation. The amount of money that is in circulation versus the money in the system is ridiculously dispersed. It's sparse. So when people know that there is excess money in circulation, a good example, let me not speak big English and all these polemics. Truth is, if I know that someone within my estate has probably 1 billion that is not cashed, their information goes around. There's information asymmetry. And I know this. For some reason, I can always peg my prices at anything, knowing that this person is going to buy. An example is, in Nigeria now, before, when you go to market and you price something, right? If you price, and the woman says, 50 naira, you say, no, 20 naira, and she said, no, and you're walking away, she says, Oga, come back. Oh, today, if you turn your back, before you take 10 steps, someone has bought it times 2 the price you were even pricing it. And that's why you see all the market people are emboldened. But this problem is only there because there is information that there is excess money in circulation. And those that have the money are willing to spend it because they have nothing to lose. They rather spend it than save it, because right now it is better to spend than to save, considering the current interest rate and the rates which the banks are willing to give you as interest on your savings, right? So the truth is, everybody is keeping the money at home. And then you have people that are also using it for speculative purposes, for switching to the dollar, which I'm not going to go into. But the truth about it is, information asymmetry is what is one of the major problems. So as long as there is excess money in circulation, we are going to continue seeing this problem. So first thing the CBN has to do, I know a lot of people will speak big English of doing oil receipts, bunkering. The truth is, all those things don't even count. The truth is, it's all bound to our production capacity. But that aside, we need to demonetize. Right? Demonetize. The CBN and the monetary authorities need to gain control again over the system, because right now there are some individuals, specific individuals, that have more power than the authorities. So until the CBN can gain that monetary power, and then the fiscal authorities work in tandem with them while they are demonetizing, and demonetization is not something you do overnight. It's something, sensitization is supposed to have started now if it's going to be implemented in the third quarter of 2025. So if we have not started doing that now, I mean, how do we expect the demonetization to work? Meanwhile, we are doing increments in NPR, and NPR is just pursuing inflation rate. Inflation is 33%. Let's just keep it at 33. NPR is 24. So before you bridge that gap for investors to start coming in, there's an investment deficit, 24% to 33%. It needs to cover before investors start coming in. So NPR or MPC will continue increasing rate. It's no surprise. I can guarantee you, let's continue this MPC meeting every month till 2026. They will continue increasing because inflation is the one that is directing NPR, which is not supposed to be. It's NPR that is supposed to be controlling inflation. But because there's excess money supply, there will continue to be inflation. And when there's inflation, MPCs will always sit down, increase by 150 basic points. And then when they go again, they have another meeting in the next 3 months, they increase again. And then we keep hearing the same story and the same story. Meanwhile, people are dying. It does not make sense. So it's time, sometimes it is time to take injection. Just take it once, enjoy it. And then you see the benefits rather than taking paracetamol, drinking Abu, taking pepper soup. Take the injection. It's time to demonetize. Enough of this whole MPC, NPR. See, MPC, I love what you're doing. You're doing a good job. But it's not going to work at this point because the crisis is a maladapted one. We have cost push, demand pull, inflation moving simultaneously. And this is the first time in history where we're seeing inflation and recession moving simultaneously. I mean, even Keynesian theory doesn't have a solution for this because they say when there's inflation, you have to mop up money and do deflationary monetary policy. If you do deflationary, people are going to die. Businesses are not going to work. So at this point, you have to strike that balance. The only way to strike that balance, if you're going to go back to the original concept of what economics says, is demonetize, put everything, ceteris paribus, put everything on equal pegging ground and start all over. If you're patching a house that the foundation is already broken, give it time. It will crumble and you'll patch again.
I wish I had more time to talk to you. Quite interesting talking to you, but I want to thank you so much. We will continue this conversation sometimes, I promise you. Well, thank you so much for your contributions this week. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you.
And that's it on this episode of the program. Do join us same time next week for more on Insight. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. We'll see you next week. Be your brother's keeper. Bye for now.